So, jetzt habe ich mich schon vorgestellt. Also ich bin nicht Christine Langenfeld, sondern Andreas Paulus und wir haben das in den Sektionen etwas aufgeteilt. Ich werde heute Nachmittag die Sitzung leiten. Bin der Stellvertreter und Vorgänger von Christine Langenfeld als Vorsitzender der deutschen Sektion. And it is now my tremendous honor actually to introduce you and us, vice versa, to the Secretary General of the International Commission of Jurists in Geneva, who is in fact the Secretary General of all of us, of all of our sections. We have the honor of your presence, Mr. Canton, Santiago Canton, has a very impressive curriculum vitae in all areas regarding human rights, in particular, but not limited to Latin America. And he has also headed in these sad days, very importantly, in 2018, a commission of inquiry about the occupied Palestinian territories. So it is not only an honor and pleasure, but also a great interest by which we are going to listen to your presentation. For the rest of his career, you may look at the program on contemporary challenges and opportunities for the rule of law. Mr. Secretary General, you may go here or do it from here, whatever you like. As you like. Maybe it's better. Just stand.
Let me get my glass. Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking the three ICJs, the German-speaking ICJs, and Susanne in particular, whom I've been in contact with, for the invitation to this event, which I'm really looking forward, and I will explain why. But before that, let me apologize for not speaking in German. And the reason I apologize is because I did study German 15 years of my life, 10 hours a week, until the end of high school. And since then, I never spoke again. And believe me, I cannot speak any German or understand. I don't know what happened with those 15 years, so that's very unfortunate. But I did understood a couple of words of Susanne's presentation, which I believe are important. I understood, I believe others, but three that clearly I understood, 3 or 4, which is the drei Sektionen, which is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well, but that's right, zusammen. And I understood Barum as well. And I believe all those words are critical for my presence here, is trying to work together with the 3 sections of the German-speaking ICJs, and to figure out why and what we can do together. Since I only started the ICJ 7 months ago, and one of the challenges I have is to figure out how to engage all the ICJs, which I believe, again, Marco knows that better, and all those who know the ICJ knows it much better than I do. They have not worked very much close over the last maybe years or decades. So considering the situation of the world today, I think it's an important challenge that we need to try to find an answer. And that's the reason I am here. And I'm looking forward to continue the discussion. We are not going to find the solutions today, but if we work all together, we may be able to find them. It's a great honor to be here. As I said, I joined the ICJ as Secretary General only 7 months ago. I started March 1st. And I want to take the opportunity to talk to all of you, hopefully in the next day, if not in the coming weeks and months, and trying to find a solution to many of the challenges we have as ICJ and challenges we are having in the world today. I wish I could discuss with all of you the most important topic that you all are discussing in this event, which is the issue of sanctions. All of us who have worked on the issue of human rights for years and decades, we all know that one of the most important challenges we have when it comes to human rights probably is compliance. Compliance with decisions of international bodies, compliance with decisions of international tribunals of all sorts, compliance with political decisions that have a focus on human rights. And the other side of compliance, one of the other sides of compliance, it is sanctions. When I was Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights for 13 years, and what the main problem we had was compliance from the decision of the Inter-American Commission, compliance from the decisions of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I remember I did an estimate one time, and back then, talking about 10 years ago, the compliance with the decisions, with fully compliance with the decisions, we are only 20%, more or less. At the court level, probably more, at the commission less. And I'm talking about full compliance, because if you divide a decision of the Inter-American Commission or Inter-American Court in three categories, you have symbolic compliance, which is very common in the Inter-American system, building a monument, creating a class with the name of the victims and those type of things. You have monetary compensation, and you have justice and accountability, which is what we as lawyers, we always put as a priority. While most of the decisions were complied on the issue of monetary compensation and on the issue of symbolic issues, almost no decision was complied with on the issue of accountability and justice, which is, again, the most important thing. That's when sanctions become important. Of course, sanctions could be a way to enforce certain things at the international level, but it could be at the same time be an issue that will affect human rights in a big way, particularly when we are talking about government sanctions, and particularly we are talking about unilateral sanctions by governments. So I'm looking forward to hear the results of this event, because from a human rights perspective, it's extremely important. Hopefully, in future years, I can come back and talk about the issues that you discuss in these events, which is really what, as a lawyer and someone working on human rights for decades, is what really moves me to continue working on this field. But today I'm going to talk about a different issue. As I said, I'm here to learn from you, to learn about the important role the organizations such as the ICJs can play to strengthen human rights and the rule of law in today's world, which we are facing many difficult challenges. And I'm here to learn on how we can work together to address those challenges. In order to do that, please allow me to spend a few minutes to talk about human rights, rule of law, and the ICJ, of the work done over the last 7 decades. And from there, not necessarily today, but in the coming months and years, I hope we can come to certain agreements on what's the best approach to work on the issue of human rights and the rule of law. I was a professor of law at Georgetown University in the US. I was a professor at American University in the US, and I'm still a professor at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, my country. And I have always started all my classes by trying to convey to the students how extraordinary has been the creation of the international legal system, particularly in the issue of human rights. When you look at it, it's really extraordinary, all the evolution that we had since 1945, 1948. And I would argue that in the history of humankind, there has never been such an unbelievable progress to protect the rights of the individuals. If we choose as a somewhat arbitrary starting day, December 10, 1948, we have witnessed the establishment of the most incredible architecture for the protection of the human beings. And I tell my students that that architecture is based on 4 pillars, 3 or 4 pillars mainly. international law of human rights, the states, multilateral mechanism to supervise the international law or the compliance with international law, and civil society organizations. The first pillar, international law, as you know very well, probably today we can count several thousands of treaties, declarations, conventions, principles, resolutions, and you can pick a name, and between real law and soft law, we probably have thousands of in the body of international law regarding human rights. For the second pillar, we have at the universal level dozens of multilateral independent mechanisms to supervise the compliance with the treaty obligations, whether they are treaty bodies, the special procedures, the independent mechanisms, the Human Rights Council itself, the ICC, or the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. That's only at the universal level. And at the regional level, of course, we have the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, the African Commission and the African Court of Human Rights, and we have the Southeast Asian mechanism for the protection of human rights as well. 75% of the countries of the world have the protection of some regional mechanism, and the other part of the world that doesn't have that protection has the protection of the universal mechanism. The safety net for the individual is there for every person in the world. Under international law, there is no such a thing as a safe haven for governments that want to ignore international law or human rights. That's clear. And when it comes to the third pillar, civil society, we have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of NGOs throughout the world working on human rights every day. So when I talk to my students about the before and after of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I try to convey the idea of the magnitude of the achievement. Before 1948, there was very little, and very, very little international law. You all know that very, very well, particularly when it comes to human rights. But I really, to some extent, 1948, I always tell my students, was the big bang for international law of human rights. But I never succeeded, I believe, with my students. I was never able to convey, to really send the message to them so they can understand the big difference between what we have today and how was the world before we had all this explosion of human rights over the last 7 decades. They take it for granted. What for many of us was some sort of revolution in favor of the rights of the individuals, right now they take it for granted. And I think that's part of one of the challenges we have to address. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights started the revolution, but the revolution of 1948 has clearly not only ended, on my view, but it seems to be moving backwards. In effect, rule of law, human rights, and democracy is declining all over the world. And it's not easy to identify a moment in which the declination started, but in many meetings like the ones we have today, and many of you probably have participated in several meetings when it comes to human rights, everybody kind of agreed that the 1990s was like the golden age for advancing human rights. And since then, we have started a movement backwards. And there are some examples that, I will use some examples to clarify this point. Let me start with the case that I know the most, which is Latin America. In 1979, with elections in the Dominican Republic, it started what we call in Latin America the third wave of democracy. As you know, before, in the past, Latin America used to have mainly dictatorial and authoritarian governments. But since 1979, and during 2 decades, country after country in Latin America became a democracy determined to respect human rights and the rule of law. Latin America achieved the longest period of democratic government since the independence from Spain. But around the year 2000, things started to change. And slowly but surely, rule of law, human rights, and democracy started to deteriorate in country after country. Today, I would argue that the third wave of democracy has ended, and the new period began where the traditional values and principles of human rights and the rule of law are no longer the same. Venezuela, Nicaragua, and El Salvador are no longer democracies. Guatemala is in that slippery slope, and Peru is in a similar situation. And my country, Argentina, this Sunday has an election in which the main candidate in the polls is an ultra-right-wing populist that has Donald Trump as a model to follow. When it comes to Africa, the Afrobarometer, a periodic survey of the perception and satisfaction that African people have of their democracy, noted that fewer than half of Africans say their country is a full democracy or a democracy with minor problems, and even fewer, 38%, say they are satisfied with the way democracy works in their country. Both ratings have declined since at least 2014. Even more worrisome is that some of the continent's long-standing democracies appear to be under pressure, such as the cases of Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Ghana. In the case of Botswana, one of the regional models for democracy during decades, satisfaction with democracy is at merely 30%. And in South Africa, all indicators about democracy have dropped by 20 to 32 points, with support for democracy just around 40%, one of the lowest levels the Afrobarometer has recorded across Africa during years. Another concerning sign of African democracy is the increasing tolerance for the role of the military in politics, a view particularly strong among young adults aged between 18 and 35, by the way, the same age of my students, which take everything as granted when it comes to democracy and human rights. And those numbers are confirmed by facts. Africa had 7 military coups in the last 3 years. This year so far, in 2023, Gabon and Niger. In 2022, 2 coups in Burkina Faso. In 2021, Guinea and Mali again in 2020. 7 military coups in 3 years. Regarding Asia and the Pacific, there is no need to get into details and numbers, but with some long-standing democracies that we all know about, they have been a solid and larger number of authoritarian governments and dictatorships during many decades already. And finally, as you know much better than me, some countries in Europe and the United States over the last years have clearly shown very worrisome signs of an absolute disrespect for human rights and the rule of law. The authoritarian trend is clear, and we know very well the consequence when human rights and the rule of law are not respected. And the ICJ and its partners also know it very well. The ICJ was created in the 50s with a very clear goal to strengthen human rights and the rule of law throughout the world. What happened during the first meeting of ICJ commissioners back in the 50s is a good example of what we need and about the relevance of the work the ICJ does. And when I refer to the ICJ, I mean all of us. In the first meeting of the ICJ, there was a discussion. It was about 20 or 30 lawyers from all over the world. In the first meeting of the ICJ, there was a discussion about condemning Russia's communism. And all of the members present in the gathering agreed to condemn Russia. And to some extent, that was the main intention of the country that was the main donor of the ICJ back then, the main or the only donor back then, which was the US government. It was during the early years of the Cold War, and the US government and some other allies wanted to criticize Russia's communist propaganda. But the ICJ commissioners were not happy with limiting themselves to criticize Russia. So they raised other issues that they believed were as critical as Russia. So, for instance, they voted to criticize Franco's Spain and to denounce apartheid in South Africa. And that's how ICJ started, to ensure that the rights of every individual are respected independently of political goals and ideologies, to also that the rule of law will reign over politics. And since that moment forward, the ICJ has been a main player in shaping international law. I also always tell my students that international law would not be the same as it is today if it not were because of the role that the ICJ had during those early years. It was the only organization working on human rights and the rule of law. through standard setting at the UN and at regional levels, through advocacy, through strategic litigation, through research. ICJ and its affiliates throughout the world played a significant role in building today's world human rights system. And this is the challenge I bring here today, a challenge for which I do not have an answer. The challenge to think collectively with a legal mind from different sectors, from legal mind from the political sector, from civil society, from the strictly legal community. What can we do to revert the trend that is eroding the rule of law and democracy and human rights all over the world? And to renovate, once again, the spirit that made the human rights movement that started more than 7 decades ago, a beacon of hope for billions of people throughout the world. Someone can argue that history is full of examples of trends that go forward and backward. And the current trend will once again be reverted, and human rights and the rule of law will once again be the rule and not the exception. But is it like that? Will we see another swing back of the pendulum if we don't do anything? Or today, as a difference from the past, there are other new factors that represent a new threat, a threat that we haven't experienced before, a threat that will make more difficult to return to a world where human rights and the rule of law are again in the top of the world agenda. I will mention just 3 things that I believe mark a clear difference between the world today and the world from the past, and you will immediately get what I'm implying. First of all, we have the nuclear threat. Of course, we had a nuclear threat back in 1948 as well. But the difference of the nuclear threat today and 70 years ago is extraordinary in the amount of nuclear power that we have today compared with the power we had in the past. Global warming, no need to say more than that. I mean, that's definitely probably the number one most important issue we all from the legal community and any other community should be working on. And then artificial intelligence. I learned couple of months ago that, in the case of Latin America at least, I don't know whether that's the same in other regions, but at least 2 judges from Bolivia publicly say that they drafted a decision in a case 100% with artificial intelligence. And that's the one that these 2 judges, without knowing what they were saying, they said it publicly. So how many more are already writing decisions, legal decisions, with artificial intelligence? And that's those 3 challenges: global warming, I would add social media, global warming, social media, the nuclear threat, and artificial intelligence were not back in the 50s. And that's definitely also changing the world. So to assume that the thing will go back is a mistake, and we need to act, we need to do something. I believe we cannot continue to walk hand by hand with the existing status quo on human rights and the rule of law. Doing so is almost a guarantee of failure. What can we do? What should be the answer from the legal community to the challenges we are facing today? What do we need to do to re-energize the work on human rights and rule of law? Our wonderful, really wonderful and incredible document, the Universal Declaration, is aging. And it's aging very fast. It's 75 years this year. So we really need to act. So that's the challenge I want to present to this great gathering of legal minds. Of course, I don't expect an answer today, but I do hope we can continue to discuss it in the coming months and years. I believe we have an obligation to do it. The great progress we made during several decades, it's a clear indication that we took the right path. But I believe that path is slowly coming to an end. But we should not walk back in the same path. We need to uncover a new one. That, I believe, is our main challenge. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you very much, all of you, for your time. I hope this is just the beginning of a new partnership that if the ICJ had not been created back in 1953, 54, I think we should create one now. But because I know that the relationship among all the ICJs throughout the world have not been very good in the past decades, I'm here to to try to find the ways to identify new mechanisms in which we can work together. I already started meetings with ICJ Australia, ICJ Colombia, and US ICJ, and this is a really good following up, having 3 ICJs together here in Luzern. I will continue to reach out to other ICJs, but we need to brainstorm, all of us, on what's the best way to put our legal capacities at work to address the main challenges we have in the world today, challenges that will that are affecting all of us here in this room, but will affect our children and our children in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Santiago. And of course, we would have wished that at the beginning of your new task, you would have an easier plate of things to do. On the other hand, we are happy that we have you and that we can go forward together to meet those tasks. And we will indeed discuss tomorrow between the presidencies of the different sections where we can go forward to a closer cooperation because this world is difficult enough and it needs all of us. So thank you very much indeed and for coming and for being ready to meet again tomorrow.